Everyone will tell us that we need the technical skills, and we absolutely do. That is 100% going to be important in the future. But I think softer skills will have a renaissance because right now, and certainly for the foreseeable future, AI can't sit with you in a room and put its hand on your shoulder and tell you have cancer with any empathy or understanding for what that journey is going to be like.
I'm Dr Louise Messara, and this is the Future Health Podcast. In a world where we can't seem to agree on today's facts, it's sometimes hard to envisage moving together towards a shared vision of the future. Co-author of a recent research paper, Hopes, Fears, Aspirations and Desires of Australia in 2035 and Beyond, today's guest, Katie Rigg-Smith, is Chief Strategy Officer for WPP and is a renowned strategist and futurist with a particular talent for deriving stories from data and then turning them into actionable strategies to help clients imagine and prepare for different future realities. Today we're going to imagine along with Katie as she piques our curiosity with what if solves for aged care, housing, education and, of course, healthcare. Welcome, Katie. Okay, so let's get straight into it. How positive is Australia feeling about the future?
I think what we know is Australia feels very positive about living in Australia. So we have seen that particularly relative to other countries. So WPP's BAV group run a best countries survey every year, and they rank countries according to the best countries to live. Right. And Australia, according to the rest of the world, is the 5th best country. According to ourselves, because we know better, we're the 4th best country. So there's positivity about living here. How that translates into the future, I think, is entirely dependent on whether we can maintain the quality of life that we've come to expect.
So, okay, we think we're pretty good. Just sort of wanting to hold on to that goodness, potentially put us at risk of being risk averse. I think when we all think about the future, sometimes we're thinking about big leaps that need to be made. But if we're pretty happy as we're going, is that an issue for Australia?
Well, you know, that's absolutely the fear, right, is that you grow complacent or you avoid anything that disrupts the status quo. But what we found was actually almost the exact opposite, where we did a study into what Australia will look like in 2035, our hopes, fears, aspirations and desires. And what we found is that Australians are actually seeking change. And not just any change, but radical change. And I think that comes from the idea that if we do want to maintain this quality of life, we need to innovate and change in order to be able to do that.
So if we think about radical change, that sort of leans into needing a lot of viewpoints, different perspectives, interesting new ideas, something novel from left field. In this time of, I suppose, radical polarisation.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to facilitate those sorts of conversations?
Well, that was certainly an interesting tension we found in our research, which was on one hand, we want radical change, which, as you just said, that requires pushing boundaries, that requires entertaining ideas before their time and being comfortable in the discourse. But on the other hand, by our own admission, we believe Australia has lost our ability to do that. So almost 3 in 4, 74% of Australian citizens do not believe we know how to debate topics in this country anymore with respect to the other point of view.
Wow.
And then what happens from that is that we don't want to share our point of view. So 53% of Australian citizens saying they're too afraid to speak their mind publicly.
I wonder, does that hold true for all age groups? I suppose when I think about those that are at sort of the forefront of new ideas, it's often the younger people advocating for social change and the like, and certainly on social media or, you know, younger people's use of social media, we see a lot of commentary going on. Are they as held back as that data sort of suggests?
Well, unfortunately, it is almost the inverse, where that younger audience are the ones that are more likely to strongly agree that they're too afraid to speak their minds. So 30% of Gen Z versus 17% of baby boomers. So I do think that the social platforms are impacting how willing they are to share what they really think in public for fear of retribution. And you and I both know that the big issue with that is if our younger generation are not being exposed to different points of view and ideas, then how are they going to help shape our country going forward?
So how are we going to give everybody a voice? If everyone's feeling anxious and they want to sort of sit in their houses and just enjoy the sunshine. How are we going to get them articulating their views in this space?
Well, I think that we need to firstly feel safe to voice our point of views. We need to feel safe to have a provocation around something, a different perspective. But we need to be able to do that with respect, and we need to be respected in turn. I think we also need to be comfortable with not always being right. And everyone doesn't have to agree with us. It's my experience that the best ideas often come from tension. They often come from different points of view rubbing up against each other to create something new. And I know that sounds like somewhat of a utopia, but imagine if we could create that environment here where there was respect given to the debate and it was about the co-creation, collaboration of that thinking going forward.
I mean, is that a future aspiration, or do you think we've had that at periods of time before and we're just at a sort of an odd moment in history at the moment?
Well, it's certainly a moment that's lasted a long time because it's been, probably a decade of that. But I do agree we have had that. I think it's how quick we are to react to things, particularly in social media, and how quickly we are to try and make sure everyone agrees with us and that we're right, as opposed to just sitting, like I said, in the discourse and just listening to other people's points of view to educate yourself before you also share what you're thinking.
We've spent a bit of time in this sort of space talking to educators and employers about some of the attributes for the future workforce or some of the key skills that might be different to what we're preparing actually for today. What do you see as the sort of key attribute for the 21st century?
Oh, it's a big one, isn't it? And I know you and I are likely to talk about deductive reasoning, judgment, and critical thinking. I would like to earmark those three as defining skills. But I think in general, a defining skill of the 21st century will be that of imagination. Imaginations that lift the soul and create worlds that we want to live in. However, when I look at it through the lens of health, I think there are two more defining skills which need to be around ethics and empathy. The imagination gives us those big ideas and worlds to dream into, but the ethics is what grounds us in the reality and making sure it's right for humanity. The ethics is what makes us consider the unintended consequences of what we're imagining.
I think that's right. I wonder in the speed of progress of technology, it's almost as if we're sort of pulling ethics along with us rather than really having the framework that we can bring these new opportunities or new imaginative spaces too. That's a real tension moving into the future. Are we going to be able to keep the balance between those two elements?
I think we need to be have much more foresight and, like I said, really consider the unintended consequences of what we are imagining. I will shout to Noelle Russell, who is a brilliant technologist from the States, and she talks a lot about AI being like a baby tiger. And when it first starts out, everyone's like, it's so cute, look at that. And she's like, it's created to kill you. And we forget about that with AI. It's so novel and cute and we're playing with it as an agent, whatever it is. And we haven't thought through the fact that what is it going to do when it develops and it's big. So making sure we think through that. And then I think the third thing, like I said, is empathy, because I know that everyone will tell us that we need the technical skills, and we absolutely do. That is 100% going to be important in the future. But I think softer skills will have a renaissance because right now, and certainly for the foreseeable future, AI can't sit with you in a room and put its hand on your shoulder and tell you have cancer with any empathy or understanding for what that journey is going to be like. So I think there are some key skills that we need to be looking at.
Totally agree. Your organisation is in the business of sort of stretching thinking, and I want you to do some stretching for us today. But before we stretch into that imaginative space, what do we know about Australia in 2035?
Well, we know for a fact we'll be older. So we are ageing.
Well, you and I will be older, that is true.
God willing, yes. We will be certainly an older population. So by 2035, over half of Australia will be over the age of 45. By 2026, so next year alone, over 22% of our population will be over the age of 65. We are living 30 years longer than we did 100 years ago. And so that paints a very specific picture about the country. That puts particular physical, emotional and financial pressures on us as individuals and as a country, not the least in how we're going to fund this growing cohort.
I think we often in the future space talk about the sort of the horizon that makes it comfortable for people to imagine a different future. And it's often just out of reach of their own lives, so they just don't feel they'll be impacted directly. But I wonder when we're thinking about ageing and retirement, if it's just too existential for us to really put our minds to, do you find people want to lean in and talk about this space?
No, we're definitely avoiding thinking
Right.
about where we're going to live.
Right.
We found that of Australian citizens 70 years and younger, 56% said they're avoiding thinking how and where they're going to live when they're 70.
Good planning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually a byproduct of the fact that 70 doesn't seem that old anymore, and probably because I am getting older.
The Golden Girls.
Oh my gosh,
When
yeah.
you look at them, I'm a Golden Girl and I do not feel like B. Arthur. So
exactly
okay.
Right. But the reality is that we are, another defining feature of our country is the fact that we are going through life stages later. We're moving out of home later. We're having children later. We're also living longer. I read this beautiful article about a lady named Betty who turned 100 the other day, celebrated at Bunnings in the gardening section, which was just delightful. But something in her article actually made me catch my breath, which is where she said, I have lived in my retirement village for 2 decades. Wow. And I was just like, well, of course that makes sense. You would have moved when you were 80 and you're now 100. But I don't think any one of us ever thought we'd go to a retirement village for 20 years. And she looked so sprightly and wonderful in this article that I think it just shows that every generation coming through is redefining what the next generation looks like. And so 70, which used to be this really clear marker of retirement and old age, I think is being redefined.
I mean, although you sell Betty and her aged care experience very positively, I suppose it's not the dream for all Australians to end up in an aged care facility, certainly as they perhaps are today.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do some imagining. What are the possibilities for a better aged care experience?
So many, and I will try and be succinct because it's an area
Take
I'm
your
really,
time.
really excited about. But, the technology in itself will enable and empower people to live independently much longer in the home if that's what they choose to do and see out their days there. And I think it comes down to the simplicity of the technology is brilliant. So when sensors are integrated into the home, in everything, that will be a game changer for all of us. Not just biosensors for health, but just sensors in general. So setting a pantry so that you know roughly how many times that pantry door is opened a day. And if it's not opened around that rough time, a family member gets alerted. Or the fact that we will no longer interact with our devices in the same way. We won't type into them. Voice will become our dominant control. And when there's conversation with technology, that makes it easier to age around you. And then technology will become more and more intuitive, which I think will help reduce loneliness. Now, it doesn't take away from people being visited by loved ones and family, but AI robotics such as LEQ from the States have shown that they can reduce loneliness. And this is, looks very similar to a voice device that would sit on your bench top, but rather than being waited to be spoken to, it speaks to you first. It initiates discussions. It learns from what you've been watching. It reminds you to take your tablets. And so this home ecosystem with technology will allow us to age. I can imagine a world where I pay my monthly fee to my telco for my phone, my internet, and my healthcare pack. And once a quarter, once a month, a health technician comes to my house and makes sure all my age tech and my health tech is speaking to each other, that I have the appropriate tech for the age that I'm in. And that would change my relationship then also with who I'm trusting with my health. Suddenly the software and the hardware brands that I trust, I'm trusting with my health. And, it's not that hard a stretch because in the States, if you look at the fact that Atrium Health, who are, I believe, the state's largest or one of the largest at-home hospital care providers, have partnered with Best Buy's, an electronic technology retailer.
Really? Right.
And what they do is the Best Buy's Geek Squad goes into the home and sets it up so that everything is working, the technology, so the Atrium Health team can then monitor from afar. So this kind of idea, two totally different categories colliding together to provide this in-home experience is what I think we'll see more and more of.
I mean, that's interesting. And I wonder if you've got to envisage a whole heap of sort of retrofitting at the moment. Yeah. But, if we got to the point where this was how we built facilities, built homes, built our homes future-proofed for our own future ageing. I mean, that's sort of the next step, isn't it? Because I think, in all of us, when we're applying technology to an old environment, there are challenges.
Absolutely right.
That's sort of
You'd have a check to see how your house could be enabled with it. You have new apartments where the first floor of the apartment is actually mandated that it's all for aged care. And people can buy that as their retirement. And then you have more people together, which means if nurses and doctors and anyone, health technicians are having to visit, they're going to more
sort of a
spaces
cohort
together. Exactly. Yeah. But the actual apartments are completely and utterly decked out with that integration of technology.
Okay, so that's one direction. We're playing with plausible, possible
we like
futures.
a spectrum.
Yeah, okay. So one is that we tech enable your own environment so you can stay in your own environment.
Yeah.
But that's sort of really, I think, sometimes, our solution up until now has been to create spaces for older people to go.
Yeah.
What about if we thought about a society where we brought older people back in?
Yeah.
I think you've got something to say about multi-generational living.
We're so passionate about this, and I love the idea that we could create more multi-generational living in this country. According to the ABS, there are 335,000 people living in multi-generational, which is 2 adult generations or more together. And that's not a lot, right?
No, I was going to say that's sort of almost tiny.
Really small, but I hazard a guess it's because we don't have the inventory tailored to what we need now. It's got to be more than a granny flat in the backyard.
Like the tiny house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How could we reimagine spaces and create them to facilitate multi-generations living together, being far enough apart in the home if they need to, coming back together? How do we play with it so it's not just the outskirts of town, but inner city areas as well could be reimagined in that way? And, when we asked Australians about it, 64% of Australian citizens say it makes economic sense to have intergenerational living. What I found kind of funny was that when we asked them if it would make them happier, that was a whole different kettle of fish.
Right.
And different by generation and not how I was anticipating. It was actually the younger generation that felt intergenerational living would make them happier than the older generations.
Well, there's that drive for connection that in a way,
Totally
the
agree.
way we're all interacting these days, the younger generations.
Leaning into
Lean
it more.
into, yeah.
And certainly it's probably not surprising, but people with kids thought it would make them happier than those without. Right. And then I think what will be interesting is the role that multicultural Australia plays in this, because we know we're a wonderful melting pot of different cultures in this country. According to the latest census, we are a migrant majority, with 51% of Australians being either first or second generation. And we do know that different cultures, it's more customary to have more families
100%,
and generations living under the one
That's why I'm
roof.
surprised the numbers are so small.
And that's where I think, again, we just don't have the inventory to allow it. What we found is that the research validated that in that people that speak a language other than English in the home are more likely to strongly agree it makes economic sense, but also twice as likely to agree that it makes you happier. So we might see that push come from different cultures seeking out that home environment.
So are you going to push a new housing, is this a new
I think
housing policy solution?
I do think I'd love to see policy like the apartments are facilitated on one end for aged care. And then I do think if we could rezone land and if we could reconsider even electricity grids and how certain families pay that back, what would happen to wills? How do you reorganise mortgage and home loans? Like there's a lot to think through, but I do think that it would be a wonderful way to look at different housing solutions.
Okay, the housing crisis is a very current issue, and we have a generation of young people who, in we're hearing, are making career decisions on the basis that they now think, well, I won't be able to afford a home.
Yeah.
So actually I can take years out, I can change jobs. There's a completely new environment for the way they're thinking about work because a house isn't in their future.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be the way it is. So
no, I mean, well, you could imagine again, and this is where you imagine big and then you work back through the steps of what the reality is. But imagine if every time a child was born, a parent had to open an account for them and they had to put in $1 and the government would match that $1 and it was like a superannuation. And by the time they are at a stage of being able to afford a home, they already have enough of a nest egg to be able to do that.
Do you think that we're missing a trick in thinking about the future sort of on the basis of what our priorities are today? So we all think owning your home, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Maybe the fact that the housing crisis exists, which leads young people to think, oh, we'll toss that out as a dream and now I'm going to become a world journey traveller with many careers. I mean, maybe that's a better future.
Absolutely. And it should be. They should be able to wildly imagine what that future looks like. And again, if there are different configurations of homes, if there are different types of multi-generation, if there are different ways to age, if there are different homes that we have around us, then we can imagine not necessarily having to buy them ourselves. Maybe we can lease a home. Maybe there are other ways to look at it and enable people to do the things that they want to do and travel, etc. So absolutely, I think whatever people want to do. We just want to enable them to have that chance so that they aren't holding themselves back based on the fact that they don't feel like they can ever achieve their dream.
Let's turn our attention towards education for a minute, if we can. And so much of the future is dependent on this sort of moment now. Right now, it feels like maybe for the first time we're in a situation where we're being robbed of the ability to rely on our own senses. And we've got this extraordinary access to information. We have all these amazing new tools. And we're also being inundated with misinformation, which is sort of scary for every generation and scary in healthcare as well. We have a lot of people making really critical decisions for themselves and their family based on unreliable information.
Yes.
We talked a little bit earlier, or you mentioned and wanted to park deductive reasoning and the like. Are these going to become really critical skills that we're teaching our children from preschool all the way through?
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned it. We used to know that you couldn't always trust everything you heard and you couldn't always trust everything you read, but you could trust what you saw. I mean, the ultimate validation that something happened was I saw it with my own eyes. And now bad actors in generative AI are robbing us of that. Back in May 2023, there was the deep fake image of the Pentagon being bombed, and it looked so real. It was shared out on certified accounts, and within minutes, it wiped the S&P 500 index, dropped 30 points in a matter of minutes, wiping 500 billion USD off the market. Now, that came back again when everyone realised it was a deep fake. But this is the world that we're in. We have, as you said, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and the World Health Organization talks about infodemics. So our children desperately need to be armed with the skills of deductive reasoning, critical thinking, and judgment if we're going to help them navigate this world.
So are our parents, our schools, our university, our educators, are they equipped? Are our institutions equipped to teach these skills? Are we ready?
The short answer is no, but I'm at pains to say this is not a dig at the wonderful educators and teachers who turn up to our classrooms day in, day out. And I know my children's teachers are just brilliant, but I think we're identifying that the world around us is changing. And so in our research, 77% of Australian citizens didn't feel that schools are equipping our children with job-related skills such as deductive reasoning, critical thinking and judgment. And it was even more pronounced when Gen Z were asked. Now, this is arguably the generation that have finished studying most recently, and they were at 85% saying they didn't feel they were prepared.
I mean, we need to listen to that because they're the ones that are identifying they're not ready for the jobs they're entering into.
Exactly. And those skills, because if you think about it, they're also entering into jobs that 3 years ago when they started studying, there are jobs that exist now that didn't even exist 3 years ago. So how you give them those baseline skills, and parents are crying out for help in that area too. Only 28% of Australian citizens who have a child aged 18 and under feel confident in being able to give them clear advice on what skills they need. So the parents are also asking.
I mean, it's probably at every level. Employers probably are struggling to know what skills they're going to need in the next 5 to 10 years as well.
Exactly.
It's cascading down. I mean, I wonder where the balance is in terms of equipping schools with access to the technology and managing it. I mean, it is interesting. I think I've read recently that some of our Scandinavian friends are removing technology from the classroom, which sort of, if we're trying to equip kids to be job ready and technologies in the world, it's a bit radical, but I think their understanding was that we are missing some other developmental milestones by relying too much on the tech. So it's a complicated space.
I love that they're trying that. And I think as well, if you think about it, the technology is only going to keep changing. And so that's where I think those skills of deductive reasoning, critical thinking and judgment, actually, it doesn't matter what technology infrastructure is around people. If you can arm them with that, then they can learn to apply it to whatever technology comes their way.
Okay, Katie, I feel an imagine if situation coming at me.
Imagine if. Look, imagine if it was mandatory for every parent to spend 2 hours every month in the classroom talking with their children and sharing out scenarios around deductive reasoning, critical thinking and judgment. And so it wasn't just the children from 5 years old that we're giving scenarios to and talking about and arming them with these skills, but actually we also invite parents in to learn with their child how to have these conversations, how to help them. I mean, even down to conversations around is that image, do you think that's a real image from AI? Do you, like, all of those things, deductive reasoning around how do we think that different societies should interact together, all of those things, if the parents could be part of that discussion and the children, then we could arm a lot of generations in one hit with this ability.
I mean, you raise one really good point there, which is, I mean, at least the digital native kids are sort of maybe alert to some of this stuff. As parents and grandparents, the misinformation might be more impactful actually on us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not attached to sort of a learning institution that can teach us these
Absolutely
skills.
right. And the grandparents, you're right, grandparents play such an active role in children's lives, in grandchildren's lives as now. So engaging them as well is a really good point.
So how do we release these parents, working parents, to get into the classroom?
Well, that would be where we'd have to be able to say you get 2 hours a month. Like, that is just, it's a part of an annual leave agreement. But we know that employers as well are wanting people to be armed with this information and be armed with the ability to have these skills. And it is a shortfall in institutions, education, all of that. And so, you know, there's a benefit for everyone if we can just spend a little bit of time having this conversation. And I think it comes back to then helping with the earlier points we were talking about with we've lost the ability to debate a topic with respect. But how about we start mirroring that more? That then translates to more effective workforces where people can actually talk about topics and debate things with respect. You know, again, I'm going very, Pollyanna, futuristic, utopian, but I do believe that if we can get down to just listening to each other and debating the topics and not being afraid of different ideas, we will end up in a better place.
Okay, this is the Future Health podcast, so
Okay,
I'm
yep.
now going to point us in that direction.
Yep.
As an Australian, I think most Australians that I talk to believe we've got a pretty good health system and certainly believe in the sort of philosophy of of free healthcare for all, and would really be leaning towards an even more equitable health system than we have today. But I think there's also a realisation, and we hear it when politicians get up and speak, that our health system is costing us more and more and more. And so choices are having to be made, and these are difficult decisions. I'm interested in what you think some of the future ways we might address. We want great healthcare for all. We want more and more. And we're always going to have this, restriction on what we have to spend. How are we going to manage?
Well, you're absolutely right. We have one of the most envied healthcare systems in the world, as we should. It is truly wonderful. But I think this is where Australians are seeking change, because I think they're very conscious that how do you maintain that for the next 10 years? How can we afford that? And what was interesting to see was a growing number of Australian citizens willing to accept responsibility for proactively taking care of their health. So in our research, we found that people that make 150K or more are more likely than those in lower incomes, but to feel that Medicare should not be a standardised cost and that they should pay less if they are consistently taking steps to proactively look after their health. And it's unsurprisingly, the younger generation strongly agree with that than the older ones, because they're in the prime of their health. You'd have to work through a lot of ethics with this and a lot of how it would be fair and equal. But the idea that we can proactively take care of our health and be rewarded for that is not foreign to a country like South Africa, where they don't have a Medicare equivalent and their largest health insurer is Discovery Health. And what they do is a vitality check. It's all based on a lot of metrics, but they then reward you with points and incentives if you proactively look after your health. And that's not just exercise, but if you buy healthy food, they've got aligned with supermarkets. And if you can show the receipt on buying the healthy food, then you're also rewarded. So this idea of how we can lean into it, which is only going to be further enhanced by technology. I mean, the sheer amount of wearable technology that helps us proactively manage our health makes that even easier.
So we're going to have, as you say, much more information individually as a health system. But, I ask almost all the guests, how are we going to, as a society, translate all these things we now know about ourselves and ways we could be more healthy into getting up and going for the walk, choosing not the donut, whatever it is. How do we do that behaviour change? I'm interested talking to someone in your space, which is all about influencing people's choices and decisions. What's the future of that behavioural change?
I do think that it will come down to incentives, and talking to people from South Africa, they were like, you know what, if we don't hit our walk by the Friday, you don't get, there's a definite accountability piece where you are constantly being minded that you've got to achieve this target by this date or else you no longer get your incentive or your discount. So I think there is definitely goal-oriented and those kind of small KPIs. I think as well, It's how the technology will start to integrate into just our everyday lives and give us information that we had no idea. I mean, everything we need to know about our bodies the data is in our bodies, right? But all of the wearable tech is now helping us extract it, which on one hand is amazing. We have all this information. I mean, there's Withings in the US have launched a U-Scan, which is a biosense for your toilet. It sits in the rim of your toilet like a toilet duck, and it reads biomarkers from your urine. 4 years on, 13 patents later, it can distinguish between one person's urine and another, toilet water, etc. It's giving us all of these stats, so it's amazing. On the other hand, we don't know what to do with that. Like, how much information do we have that we don't know what to do with? And so that's where I think healthcare professionals will become even more into their own. Ironically enough, the more information we have about ourselves, the more help we need deciphering it.
Yes,
and
we'll become interpreters. Yeah.
Exactly. And also people that are going to undo the bad decisions we make because we think we know enough and we think that the technology has told us what we need to know. But one of the things that did interest me in our research was that 42% of Australian citizens said they would consent to handing over their healthcare data to the federal government if there was an incentive and reward attached to it. That's higher than my gut had told me going into the research. I was actually quite surprised to see that.
I mean, look, leaning on from that, if there's a proportion of us prepared to give our health data, I wonder what the tolerance could be in 20, 30 years in giving, away our biologic and genetic material as well, if it meant something like, the ability to prevent so many of the diseases and the chronic diseases that we're afflicted with. That is an interesting space.
Such an interesting space because it goes back to that value exchange. I'm willing to give you my information if there is something in it for me, and I'm willing to think through, you can help prevent me ever getting a disease, then of course. However, this is where the ethics and the really thinking 10 steps ahead of those consequences. How could bad actors get involved? How could that be manipulated? How could all of those things would have to be thought through in order, I believe, for people to feel comfortable in any kind of exchange in that area.
I mean, humans are super complex, aren't they? Because, I mean, a lot of us have given our DNA away to find out if we're a bit Scottish, so sometimes it's, we toss that away, but we're very protective of certain things. I suppose that comes down really to the trust we have in our institutions and our organisations and even our government, which comes back to Australia being the lucky country. Maybe in our context, maybe we'll get to the forefront of that because we're a largely trusting country, I think. I think we showed that in the pandemic.
I agree.
We listened to government. We did what we were sort of told. But to me, it is very strange what pieces of the puzzle we're loose with and what we're very tight with.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
2035 seems quite far away and then not far away at all. And I think some of the areas we've talked about today make me feel like we have to sort of finish the conversation so we can all run away and do these important things that we need to think about and get ready. But before we do finish the conversation, are there any other messages you'd like our community here that are thinking about the future, they're engaged in the future? What's the message you'd like to leave them with?
Well, firstly, I'd love to thank this community. My dad was a doctor and my mum was a nurse, so I just have so much respect for what you all do. I think that the more the people that can lean into the future and really be open to all the things that are coming, because health is going to be disrupted by technology probably more than any other category, but it has the complexity of the fact that this is a life and death category. And so how do we lean into it, be open to it, embrace it, but at the same time, how do you keep grounding it in the role of humanity and making sure that the ethics and those conversations are happening, because we will rely on you to be able to do both of those things. But if anything, I'm just excited for this community because you are at the forefront of technology change. Companies and businesses are coming at you because that's where the money in the future is going to be, in age tech and health tech. And so you're at the forefront of this dynamic industry. And I can't wait to see how it continues to evolve.
Katie Rigg-Smith, thank you for joining us at the Future Health Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of myself and today's guest, and do not necessarily reflect the position of New South Wales Health. Any content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as endorsement or approval by the organisation. New South Wales Health does not endorse any products, services or companies mentioned in this content.